Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Stephan Hogan, and today's guest has had multiple Grammy nominations. He is a producer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist whose catalog boasts over 150 recorded songs, including Jon Pardi's 3-time platinum Night Shift, Little Big Town's double platinum single Wine, Beer, Whiskey, and Lady A's Ocean, as well as over 100 sync placements across TV and film, including ad campaigns for Samsung, Microsoft, Old Navy, and here are some of the artists he's written songs for. We got Jason Mraz, Tim McGraw, Keith Urban, Tyler Hubbard, he was in a little band called Florida Georgia Line, Carly Pearce, Darius Rucker, or you might know him as a singer from Hootie and the Blowfish, and many, many, many others. Currently, he's actually on the charts as a co-writer of the ACM-nominated song Can't Break Up Now by Old Dominion Megan Moroney, which the two recently performed not only at the CMT Music Awards, but the CMA Awards. It's an honor to have him. Welcome to the show, Tofer Brown. So you come to Nashville.
Came to Nashville.
How old were you?
I was 20 years old.
Okay.
Didn't know anyone. I knew my brother's high school girlfriend lived here, and it's not like I had a relationship really with her. I mean, she's still a family friend, but I didn't know really anyone, and I just dove in. This is the world of MySpace was so big back then. So I was just networking, meeting people, dropped out, ended up working for a Christian producer for 2 years. I emailed him on MySpace. I just said, hey, I've been in school for this, but I feel like music is like, you can take 1 million classes, but until you live in the country, you don't speak the language.
100%.
So I was like, I just want to be in your environment. Like, I will run to Starbucks. I'll do whatever. I don't care. So that was 2 years of that. And through that, I worked with some artists that he was with, and I got my first cut on a label through him. But meanwhile, like, I'm an artist, but I'm like starting to see some mailbox money from that. And I'd been offered publishing deals on and off as an artist for years, but I always was like, no, I'm not a staff songwriter. I'm just kind of led with my ego a little bit. Thought I would just have everything for the rest of my career. And
what were you doing with all those songs you were writing?
For other people?
No, well, were you releasing your own?
I was releasing my own records, and I
were you saving your best songs for you?
Yeah, typically. Yeah. And then, but it was kind of more so like when I wrote, I would release it. Like, I would just invest. If like I didn't think something was there, I just wouldn't chase it, really. It was just kind of like, oh, this course is cool. I'll come back to it. And now my life looks so different. But back then I just wasn't as learned in this business of writing as much as you can. And then I just kept always hitting walls as an artist. I remember there was an A&R from Capitol out of New York and here that wanted to sign me, and I went to New York a couple times, showcased. This is for a pop deal, and I'm like, oh, this is happening, and then it didn't happen. And then another publisher from LA wanted to work, and then it didn't happen.
What was the reason that they told you?
Well, it's funny, and it really does kind of tie into my story of becoming what I am today. A huge thing that I would meet with these A&R people, and they'd be like, man, we love what you do, but you do a lot of different things as an artist. Like, stylistically, there's something that's folkier, and then there's something more singer-songwriter, more poppy, more rock. And at that time, I was offended because I was like, oh, yeah, it's because I could do it all. Like, but I didn't even think about how for someone at a label that is maybe a marketing nightmare, because they're like, where do we put you?
Yeah.
And so I just kept hitting those walls. I was in a duo for a while with a girl. We worked with Jay Joyce in town. We worked with all these big country writers. It was right back when Lady A was hitting, so everyone was kind of looking for guy-girl duos.
Yeah.
And we got close to working with Warner. Like, Warner was interested at the time. I shouldn't say got close, but they were coming to shows, and same thing. It just kept kind of hitting walls, and I just hit a point where I was like, I'm tired of having to knock. And I know that I'm created to create, but can it look a little differently than what I've thought it's supposed to be?
How many years in was that from age 20?
Probably about 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
So that was really when I made my first recording around 15. It was about a 10-year spread of only really thinking about I'm the artist. And I remember a huge turning point in my career was my brother was a staff writer at a Christian publishing company for 9 years, and I was watching him every day go and write, and he would just be done, and then he wouldn't have to promote, and because he kind of was done being the artist thing. We both kind of did that a little bit. And I remember the girl I dated at the time that I was in the duo, we decided to put our music down. We're like, let's just be in a relationship. But at that moment, I had my come to Jesus where I was like, well, crap, like this is what I like kind of planning on being our money, like how we're going to live is do music. And I remember my brother sat me down and he was like, why don't you just, you've been offered publishing deals and you've always just kind of been, no, not for me. He's like, why don't you intentionally go for it? Just see what happens. And I remember just like sitting with that for a week or two. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. Cause I built a network as an artist, meeting all these writers and producers. And I just started booking myself. And I was like, I'm just going to write every day. And I would do doubles. I was writing so many songs. And within 6 to 8 months, I had 3 publishing offers. And the thing I had asked for all those years as an artist was happening as a producer and writer. And then it's like it all started. I always tell people are like, oh, you gave up on your dream. I'm like, no, my dream just got more focused. It just came into focus. It's like I had the glasses, but it was still blurry. It's like I finally saw what it was supposed to be. And all the roads of me working on all these different styles and different artists led to that point. And it was just like...
Which is so critical to be a chameleon.
Yeah, totally. And I think all those years of A&R people being like, oh, you sound this, that. Now I kind of get to be that. Now my artistry, my artist thing, as we say, now lives through so many different, I jump around. If you've looked at what I've written, I jump around from sync music to country to pop to working with an international artist to this. I'm like, it's a little
CCM,
ADD.
R&B.
Yeah, a little bit, just kind of dabble because I really love music. Like when people are like, oh, are you a country writer? I'm like, I can write country, but like I will never be typecast as just like, oh, that's what you do.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally.
Yep.
Was there a spiritual aspect to that too?
Absolutely.
Because I'm interested. Because for me, I had visions of my life and where I'd be by the age I'm at now, and at some point I was like the Bible says, a man plans his steps, but God guides his path. And I didn't really see that come to fruition in my life until probably the last couple years. And I was like, you know what? I could try everything in my power to do X, Y, or Z, but if it's not meant to be,
it's not happening.
A different door is going to open.
Absolutely. And that was another thing. I talk about my brother a lot, but he is so important to me, and we still work on music together. But I remember early on when this job is, they always say comparison is a thief of joy and all this. And when you're on your path and you see someone going a little bit farther sooner and you're like, I'm not on the right path, you question it a lot. Like, and especially this day and age where the phone, the internet, we're just being thrown information, and it's impossible to, joy is so temporal now. Like, it's just like you could have the best day and it just be plummeted. And I'm sure you feel it too, like in anything you do. But I remember my brother, I was like, how do you deal with it? Like, how do you deal? And he looked at me, he's like, what's meant for you will be for you. No one can replace it or take it. And if someone has that, that's for them. And I have to preach that and pray that over myself still to this day. And really coming into being a writer producer, I had to kind of check my ego a little bit at the door, because I had created this persona and this identity of who I was and how I wanted to be perceived and seen. But, God had a different plan. And I really do feel like all those roads of what I've done, it was coming to a fine point, and it felt like I was all over, but it really was just always moving forward. It's just moving differently than I thought.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's a very cool story, because I think that's a lot of us. I think that's a lot of people.
You have to have a willingness to be open too. Like we'll talk about things I do, but I work with so many different types of artists, and I do think there's a fine line between like, this is what I am, and also being humble and being like, I can evolve, I can shift, I can, like, obviously as a producer writer, I'm always drawn to these artists that are like, this is exactly what I have, because it's just like, oh, that's less work for us. But I also think in my own life, I can use as an example is it's like, it's good to be open to knowing that it's not failure. It's just things coming into focus.
Yeah.
I think we're so quick to be like, well, I could easily be like, I was a failed artist. I could say that, but I'm like, no, I'm a success story, because my artistry blossomed the way it was supposed to blossom. If I would have stopped, then maybe it would look a little different, but I've always known since the first time I hit the black and white keys that I was supposed to be doing music.
Yeah. Or maybe your artistry, sorry to interrupt, is impacting more people now than it could have potentially impacted if you had gone the entertainer route.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, like I've been blessed enough to work with so many amazing artists.
Yeah.
And it's reached countries that I'll never go to.
Yeah.
Like, that is amazing.
Yeah. I will say, checking your ego at the door, that had to be really difficult, especially as a really proficient player. So when you're really good at an instrument and you go into a write and you're writing with an artist and they are not musically inclined or vocally inclined necessarily, but it's what a label's running with. And then there you are, and in the back of your mind, you're thinking, man, I could crush this.
I could run circles around you.
Yeah, and I'm having to use my creative talent to write you a song that's going to be something that is way better than you could have ever done by yourself. That's a really interesting juxtaposition.
It's tricky, and I still deal with that. Like, I mean, I'm fortunate that the longer I've been doing this, that I have gotten to be a little more choosy with what I do. But I still have sessions sometimes where I'm like, how did this person get a record deal? And like, they don't even know how to write a song, or they don't, and that's fine. Some voices should just be pitched songs. I'm like, and let that be that. Like, I have a catalog I could give you. It's tricky, and especially with the way the internet is with TikTok and artists, it's just like, real artists are so rare now. Like, people are just personalities at this point.
Yeah, dive into that. What do you mean exactly when you say real artists are so rare?
I just think that when I think about artistry, I'm not saying that they don't exist now, because they do, but when I really think about it, I think about the Tom Pettys, the Paul Simon, the Beatles, Jackson Browne, these people that lived their art. Like, their stories were actually their lives. Like Fleetwood Mac, like that tension that you felt in the song was the tension of the band. I feel now people are writing songs to win people rather than writing what is true to them. And that balance is hard. And as a staff songwriter for a company, I write a lot of things that I've never experienced. It's role playing in a way, and it's becoming a character. But when it comes to the artist, like, I think the intangible ingredient of art and what resonates to people is not how good it sounds. It's the connectedness that the artist feels with what they're saying. That is the thing that I'm like, you hear it. Like, when you heard someone like you, Adele, that ache in her voice, you're like, oh, she's singing about something that she experienced. Obviously, Adele could sing about anything and it would sound good. But the feeling and that emotion that you feel when she hits those notes and those lyrics, you're like, oh, this is real life. Like, this is your real story. And I think people find themselves in music faster when the artist is found in it as well, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I feel like the industry is very risk averse.
Mm-hmm.
So the person that would be the Tom Petty or the Paul Simon or Simon and Garfunkel or whoever that artist may be, they're often the one that is not going to get the attention. Or you hear those stories all the time. Or Keith Urban, for instance, is a good country example of someone that's like, what are we going to do with an Australian country singer?
Exactly. And I mean, you look at just even where the state of the music business is now. If you don't do well basically on your first song, you're kind of hosed. I mean, I'm not saying that it's over. And I think if you're resilient, you get it eventually. It might shift a little bit, but resiliency, I always feel, is one of the most important ingredients in any business. But
it's very true, though.
It's getting back up after being knocked down is everything. I mean, I think talent is important, people skills, but the ability to hear a million no's and be like, there might be a yes out there still. Like, and having that blind optimism, that little kernel of, if you can just keep watering that little kernel of hope a little bit, it will grow. And I do think biblically hope can be fulfilled. Like it is not just, we're not being tortured here, even though we are tortured artists in a way. But I stick back to the Tom Petty, Paul Simon, those artists now, if they came out, they would be dropped.
Yeah, I was going to say that they'd never be signed in the first place.
They wouldn't be signed.
They didn't have the voices.
Yeah, because a lot of those artists didn't really hit for a few records. If you don't, the first record, like you're dropped, you're done. So I think now is harder than ever to be a real, true artist that is like building their army of fans and their career and their foundation. Mm-hmm. I think about me now as opposed to, because I had it a little bit with the MySpace, Facebook, but it was a lot different.
Yeah, that was an era where you could still sell CDs.
Yeah, it was like, people always say it was like I had an analog childhood and a digital adulthood. Mm. So there was still like, I sold records. I played shows and brought merch. Like it wasn't just like, oh, scan a QR code, blah, blah, blah. Like there was physical copies to rely on. Now it's like, it's so funny. Now it's like vinyl is what people make. I'm like, man, we really are. We're going forward and we're going back. We're just stretching.
Yeah, there's a big nostalgia cycle happening,
and it always does, and it always will. I always think CDs will come back at some point.
I think you're right.
I've never gotten rid of my CDs. In fact, I just looked in my garage today. I saw a Beck C change in the box, and I was like, I wonder if my kids will someday be like, oh, you kept your CDs, Dad. Because I was mad when vinyl came back and my parents were like, oh, I had every Beatles record and I just threw them away. I'm like, cool.
Yeah, I hear you there. Let's talk a little about the music business side because you have such a insider's perspective to be able to see what you said about labels. And I think that's really important because we see so many people getting signed off of TikTok. Mm-hmm. Like they had a song that hit on TikTok, their numbers went way up, or they have a lot of traction on TikTok. Mm-hmm. They might get signed to a publishing company for an artist development deal, which is kind of the minor leagues for the majors, which is they develop the artist and then pitch them. And then you could get signed and shelved, or you could get signed and your song could go out and it could just like fall flat, or you didn't have the right amount of radio promotion. And there's so many variables in the whole thing.
So many.
What have you seen in terms of what works best versus what works? Because you've sat in so many rooms with writers or artists or people that have deals that are on the come up, and they're looking for the hit song that they can go to the label with and say, all right, here's five singles. Like we've got 5 amazing songs. Mm-hmm. And then nothing happened with them. Is there any magic?
It is magic. It's like you can't explain it. I know some of the most talented people in the world that you'll never hear. And it's just, I wish I could say it's because of this or because blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can look at all those variables. They're all important. I'm a little bit of the curmudgeon-y grandpa where I'm like, oh, TikTok. But then like someone I'll write a song and they'll be like, it got 1 million views in a day or two. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, I don't really, I feel like it has to be part of it, but can't be all of it. And I think that's where my frustration is like, it's just a platform. Just like back in the 70s, putting up your poster about your show was a thing you did. Like, this is just one of those tools now. As far as what works, I do think the common thread that I've seen, whether you're a new artist developing or a big artist like Keith Urban, who I've worked with, or Little Big Town, or these artists, is a conviction and an assertiveness with what they know that they're going for. I think having, I know that probably goes a little bit back on what I said earlier. I'm like, it is good to be open and involved and like bring in a new writer here or there, but ultimately that nucleus has to be in the artist. Like, it can't be at the mercy of the producer. It can't be at the mercy of the A&R or the songwriters. They're all part of it, but I always tell people, I'm like, I am not the captain of the ship. Even though I produce records, the artist is the captain. So if they're not the first believer in this, how do you expect anyone else to believe it? If they're not the first fan, how do you expect to get fans? You need to like what you do. Like, there's a lot of people that are making music to be famous or to get attention. And I get it, because it's juxtaposition and dichotomy at its finest, because if you do it well, you do get attention. So it's like, if this, then this. Like, it's a geometry equation, really. But that can't be your motivator. Because if I've seen the people that build off of these platforms, it's not artistry, and it's like building your house on sand. You've got to have the backbone, and the backbone is the certainty of what you're doing, what you want to say, and who you want to say it to, and feeding those people. Because I still think the best promotion is word of mouth.
100%. Best marketing.
It's the best marketing. You see that in podcasts, I'm sure. You see that with people be like, oh, I listen to this. If you make something that is so true to you and you love it, it's infectious. People feel it. I've seen it. I've seen it in artists. There's like it's like almost like a pregnancy glow. Like, when you see it, you're like, oh, are you expecting? It's like, oh, you're in your zone. Like, you are really centered in what you are called to do and created to do. And that, to me, has been the common ingredient that I've seen in the new artist and the big artist. Like this, I don't know. It's like, man, I want to be a part of that. I want to hitch onto that train. I want to help that.
So they just know they know who they are. There's a strong sense of self.
Yeah. Identity is so, and a resiliency. And like, hey, this didn't work out. Well, I guess I got to go a different route, but I'm going to get there.
I think Keith has done such a great job of that in his career.
Yep.
With staying current. Because how many people stay on the radio like Keith Urban?
Not many. Same with like a Kenny Chesney. It's like, I always say Kenny Chesney's the best A&R person in town, because he still gets hit songs and knows his audience. And he's just, you almost become like a cult leader in a weird way, without getting in the weirdness of it. But like, what the people want, and you're going, and that will grow. It may not be like, obviously TikTok is great because you can instantly be known by millions of people. But how many people are really being like, I want to keep coming back for this person? It's not a lot. Like, you see it all the time. I have people my publishers will be like, well, this person has blah, 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 TikTok and blah, blah. And then I'll go and look at Apple or Spotify, and it's like, no one's really listening. So I'm like, well, there's a disconnect still,
Yeah. How important are streaming numbers for an artist? Because I've quite often heard that people will have quite a hard time advancing their careers if they're great, but they don't have the audience on streaming?
Well, numbers have always been a thing. I mean, go back to the 70s. It was, hey, you're going to play the Troubadour. Do you think you can get a few hundred people in there? Like, obviously, you didn't have the tick of it, like seeing your followers, but that's always been a thing. Now we've gotten so good at data that we just can like be like, well, I call BS because I read this is what you have in that market. It's important, but it isn't the art. That's not the art. Like I would be lying if I said I didn't look at it. Or if someone's like, oh, they have this many, blah, blah, blah. It definitely makes you go, oh, well, maybe I should pay attention. But I also know that there's always exceptions to the rule. And you can see it, like there was a country song recently that went number 1 on radio, which you're like, number 1. And I looked and it had 5 or 6 million streams on Spotify. And then like the one the next week had like 70 or 80. And I'm like, okay, so
let's stop there. Bobby Bones, you may have heard this. He says that number 1s are traded like baseball cards.
It's true. I mean, number 1s are not what they have been.
What they appear to be.
And what they appear to be.
Because what he was saying was essentially like everybody's trying to get as many number 1s as possible.
Yeah.
So there's almost like this behind the scenes,
It's so political.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen songs. Well, and you can see it. Like I read the charts some, and you'll see like the song that goes number 1 and everyone's like, the party. And then you see next week it drops like 30 spots. And you realize that like that wasn't because of demand. Because there are true number 1 songs that you see and they stay there. Like the Nate Smith's Whiskey on You. It's like 8 to 10 weeks. You're like, people are really wanting this. This isn't just because Sony was like, I'm sure there's a little bit of both and there's always a little bit happening on to make it work. But you can't fake people loving it and demanding it. Like those numbers, you can't, that's not a Chinese algorithm on TikTok.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I had an interview with Craig Campbell, and he was super candid in it. And he talked about his experience in being signed and being on tour and releasing songs and chart position and, you know, where you get and who's in control of making the decisions. And then talking with Stormy Warren about the amount of people that are actually in the seat of deciding what gets pushed out, the program directors. Like it's a very, very small amount of people that decide what the entire United States is going to hear, specifically on country radio.
Yeah.
And Craig said, and these are his words, not mine, but he said, everything's bought because you have radio promotions and it's all about pushing stuff up the charts. And he said, there were so many times, I can't even count the amount of times in my tour where it was like, hey, we're doing a radio giveaway and we need a couple of iPads. You think you could give us some? And it was always stuff like that.
Hey, Ola, they always say, oh, it's not exist. It's just, it looks different.
Yeah, it 100% exists. Now it's radio promotions, which is very expensive. I've been told it's about $1 million to get a song to number 1.
I think that's true. I think they say that $1 million or more for a country.
Yeah.
I'm sure way more for pop because it's triple the size.
Yeah.
And that's where if I obsess over that, it starts ruining all of this because I've had songs do well and songs fall fast. And I'm just like, that's out of my control. Like the only thing I can control is showing up and trying to write something I really love with people I love. Beyond that, it's a crapshoot.
So let's talk about the writing process. You've said about yourself that you're a chameleon. And I think the fact that you can do so many styles of music and that you're so well trained in music that you have that skill, such an asset, which differentiates you between a lot of writers that might just do one thing very good. And that's been part of the reason that you've had 150 cuts and 100 sync songs and all the success that you've had. And you mentioned when you show up for a write, you essentially have written plenty of things that you're like an actor almost, you know?
Absolutely.
You're like writing a script for a movie.
That's a great, I mean, that is it.
And like, how does that feel in that moment when you're writing something, but there's no actual emotional connection? Do you have to visualize it, or do you just have to try to put yourself in the shoes of this fictional story?
Well, I think one thing that plays to an advantage in me is that I'm an empath. So I by nature, I take on emotions. And I think it's my greatest strength and my greatest weakness because it overwhelms me. But when I'm in a room, I mean, I think the best songwriters are the best listeners. And there's always songs. There's songs everywhere. And like, if you and I got in a room, we could just pick up a guitar and start going, but talking like this is where songs exist. And I think getting in a room with someone, a young artist, and they're talking about their boyfriend, and I'm like, oh, that sounds like 18-year-old stuff. Like, I'm like, I've been there. I've done that. I can go there again. Do I want to go back there? No, but can I go to that place emotionally with someone? Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I'm almost 40 years old, so I have now years under my belt. And I remember being young, moving to Nashville, riding with the older people and them going there with me. And now it's like, I've seen this pendulum where I'm like, oh, now, and I'm not saying I'm all this life experience, but I do have more life experience now. And there has to be a childlike willingness to go there again and a curiosity. And sure, there's a lot of things that I write that I'm like, I didn't have that experience, but like it's creative thinking is what I'm doing. It's like my job is to jump into a character. It's like being a theater performer. You know, you see some of these, I'm a huge musical fan, and that's like probably my biggest goal. I'm starting to work on one, but
oh, that's cool.
You watch some of these extras and they're playing like 10 characters in a play, but you don't notice it. But I see songwriting as almost like being one of those people where you're helping the story come alive, but you're not seen. You're not the focal point. You are the best supporter, but you're the guy that's, you know, the bartender in one scene, and you're the dancing guy out in the field with the girl later. That's just a fluffy scene. But I think that is so fun and so necessary, because if you didn't have those people, the story wouldn't be the same.
When you talk about the story not being the same, what do you mean by that exactly?
Let me think about that. I'm like, did I just get myself in a corner? The necessity of being able to pivot. And for me, it's probably a little different than what I'm saying, but I think to be a great writer, you have to have a willingness to shift and put on the different hats. Because I know a lot of writers who are very great at what they do, but you know at the end of the day, you're going to get a blah, blah, blah song. Mm-hmm. And it becomes like, there's a lot of writers in general in this town, but everywhere, that are almost like living, still kind of wanting to be the artist. Mm. And you walk away and it's like, they're known for that thing, but they're not going to really adapt to the room. Like, you're going there and you're going there for this person's song. And I'm not going to say names because I don't think it's necessary. But I don't know. That probably doesn't answer your question, because but I'm just...
No, it's interesting. It's a
rambling man.
It's a, you know, you talk about theater, it's a kind of just peeling back the curtain on the process.
Yeah.
Which I think is very interesting for people. I look at there's a Post Malone Morgan Wallen song that's huge right now, and I was looking at the Spotify's US top songs and then worldwide, and that song's, when I looked yesterday, it was at like the number 2 spot on US and like number 3 on global. Mm-hmm. And I saw there were 8 writers on it. And I wanted to talk a little about the amount of people that write on songs and how easy is it to get credit as a writer. And in Nashville, the writes I've had, they've always been just even splits. Now, at your level, like let's say you're writing with a big artist and you know that you have something real special. Is it the same? Is it just even? Or is it like one person had one word on this thing for an idea and it was like, oh, now we got to give them the same percentage of the song? Yeah. How does that work?
Nashville's pretty even as a whole. Like, it's kind of like you're in the room, you've earned your percentage based on how many people are there. Now, does that mean that they're all carrying their weight evenly? No. There's a lot of people that get in a room and 2 people write while one person's just kind of like hanging out or like not really, because it's so relational. So if you get in a room with 2 people that have written 100 songs and you're the new person, chances are you're going to feel a little bit like the third wheel. But I do like Nashville style because I fully believe that you wouldn't have gotten that the same if that person was there. So even energetically speaking, there is a shift with having different life, and sometimes the best co-writer, like for me, and like you need to know your role, and like sometimes you just need to be the editor, and sometimes you just need to be the person to say, oh, that's good, chase that may not be tomorrow. You might be the one that said, hey, I have this chorus already finished, can you guys help me write verses? It shifts. But I think that Nashville is very fair as a whole, because it's such a, like, this is a songwriter's town. Like, it is just, they are the backbone of this town, which I love.
And you still believe that that's the case? I mean,
are there political things? Yes, absolutely. But I still think, because if you don't have the song, you don't have any of it. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to the beginning of where a Garth Brooks career or anything, it's always the song, the moment. Like, so that is so valuable, and it's so valued here, which I love. And I think that's why I've stayed all these years, because I've gone to LA for years. I do a lot of pop music, and early on in my career when I was first signed, I was going to LA every 3 months for 2 weeks or so, and I was just like, I just need to move there. And I do like creating there, but that is more like, to me, that's such a producer town, like sounds and just it's so different than the way we, like, if you and I got together to write a song, we'd pick up a guitar and just like, we wouldn't, obviously I can build a track, or you could, or something, and go from there. But it still is very much, let's sit at our guitar piano and see what comes. We'll worry about the production. Whereas LA, a lot of sessions, it's like, hey, do you have a track star? Do you have this? And that exists here. I mean, you see a lot of shift of LA here, and they're all kind of melding. But I do think that the even splits is important, because it's karma too. It's like, you want to go through and count orders or do that. And I've had experiences where people be like, hey, you left right before they rode the bridge, so we're going to give you 20%. And I'm like, that's fine. You can do that. I'm not going to be like, well, you wouldn't have had that song at all if I wasn't there.
Did that song become a number 1?
Did it?
Yeah.
No.
There you go.
There you go. But
because I'm with you on that, man. I think that there's something to be said for just being fair, and like, even if someone didn't contribute a ton, maybe that's the song that helps them get to the next level in their career.
Exactly.
Or that pays the bills that they didn't have, or the debt or whatever, and it helps them.
I just know in my life, like, you don't regret being fair, but you will regret being stingy at some point. And obviously you need to respect yourself and what you do, your family, your money you're bringing in, all that. So like, there is a time to be a certain, be like, I don't know, I need to stand up for myself. But as a whole, I'm like, man, if you really, and because I'm so, this job is so relational to me, like, character and integrity and how you handle yourself is way more important than what you've done in your career as far as success.
100%.
Being successful to me, is not how many songs you've got cut or how many hits. It's how long you've been doing this and how long have people wanting to keep working with you and showing up and being your friend and building off of that. That is success to me. And when I see these big writers who are just not handling themselves, I'm like, it comes and gets you later. I've seen it happen with people. I've seen careers start plummeting, and then they cared so much about getting their share, whatever, and then it's like the rich person in the mansion with no friends. I'm like, is it worth it at that point?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like,
that's a great analogy. It's a great way to put it.
Life is meant to be shared, and I think a fairness and knowing that, like you said, it's like me having a writer in the room that maybe not as far along as me, but they're on that, and a song that I did with them might help them get a meeting with something. Like, that's good, because you were that person. And the moment you start forgetting that you've been in that place is the moment you've gotten so far away from what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think. Yeah,
that's beautiful. Because I think we can all remember being young and shooting the MySpace message or the DM or whatever it was to the person that we really looked up to and like maybe never heard back or maybe did hear back, but to have someone that we looked up to that responded and showed an interest, or
it's huge. That's so a make or break point. I go back all the time. Natalie Hemby, huge writer in town. I loved her MySpace. And I don't know if you know who she is, but she's written everything from Pontoon to White Liar to all these huge hits. And I remember she had a demo that she had written with Daniel Tashin of the song called The Bees that Leanne Womack cut, Keith Urban sang on the background. And I just remember going and listening to Natalie had her demo on there of it. And I would just listen and listen. And I remember being like, this is when I was in the duo. I was like, the worst she can say is no. So I just messaged her and she said yes. And I still to this day write with Natalie Hemby. And we've had cuts with artists. But more importantly, I have a friend who knew me when no one knew me or cared about me. And she actually was willing to be like, you know what? I've been there. Because at the time, like when she had her first hit, she was like in the process of, she had worked at Comcast for years, and she didn't lose sight of that. And she knew that like, take a chance on someone because it could change their life. You could be the bend at the fork of the road that someone's in from, am I throwing in the towel or am I going to keep running? And I've always used her as an example, and I'm so grateful for her actually giving, and this like the confidence that it gave me to just be like, you know, I'm doing it. And now 15 years later, she's a dear friend and we write with each other and we laugh with each other. And so now to this day, and my first publisher, I remember early on, he was like, don't forget those people. He's like, always take time for the people that are dying for your time. And I
take time for the people that are dying for your time.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I
that's a great piece of advice.
I actually don't know if that's how he said it, but that's how I just said it.
How you just said it, dude. That could be the most important thing someone hears in this podcast.
Well, I really, and I'm not like trying to like toot my own horn, but I like to nurture talent. I think that we always remember those people that believed in us when they didn't have to. And I want to be that. I really do. Like, to me, that is far greater than any number one song, because that's what this life is. And there is a spiritual element to that. Like, I can't act like faith isn't a part of that. But to whom much is given, much is required. And I've been given a lot, and I am now in an opportunity where I can really be influential in people's lives and bless them and lift them up, because I know those writers and those producers and artists that are stingy. And I look at that and I'm like, man, you have such an opportunity to be a voice in someone's life. And do you really just want to keep that to yourself? Obviously there is a line. You can't just give it everything out, because you got to reserve some. And I'm not great at balancing that. I deplete myself a lot, but I I do go to bed and sleep knowing that I'm here. This is a servant's job. Like, I'm here to serve people in song and in life.
That's a very mature way to view your role in what you do. And I think for the people that are listening that are like, I want to be a songwriter, to hear that and have the focus on service and thinking like, I want to help someone versus what can I get. One of the things that I did when I first came to Nashville was I would get in these meetings and I just didn't understand how things worked. And it would be like, I'd meet one person one time and sit down with them. And it was basically like, what can I get from you? You know? And now I've completely flipped it on its head to like, what can I give? And it's just a maturity thing over time. But if I had known that, if I could have learned that lesson at a younger age.
Think about how, all that hurt that you went through for no reason. You're like, if I just have had a different worldview, mindset view of this. But that's maturity. I think it can be summed up. It's not, I'm not trying to sit over here like Deepak Chopra, like I'm like on a guru, but I'm just like, I know for me that if I put all of my eggs in the results of what I did, I would be about to jump off of a building, because this is like, it's like investing your heart into cryptocurrency. This is that you can't do that.
That's a good way to put it.
You can't. It's too volatile.
You don't know the outcome.
You don't know that, and it changes every day, just like crypto. I've watched that. I'm like, it'll be up 5,000 down to. You're like, but that is the music industry. It's shifting all the time. But the one thing that I think that remains the thoroughbred through the whole thing is the relationship and the nurturing of that. And for me, when I invest into that and the people that I get, the songs that I believe, I'm like, that's where the fruit comes. It's not from just like, oh, I got to get on this, like trying to hitch yourself onto someone's wagon. Don't. Create your own wagon. Find your people that you write with. Build off of that and just do something that's so cool and unique to what you create with that person or what you do on your own. It doesn't have to be with someone. People will come to you eventually. And I've seen that firsthand in my life. Like, I remember early on, a huge part of my career is my sister-in-law, Jillian Jacqueline. And she's now married to my brother, which she was kind of the person I was coming up with. And I remember we were just writing songs that we liked. And it led to us getting publishing deals. And then she signed to Big Loud for a while, Morgan Wallen's label. And then now she's on Virgin. And I've seen that the music that we made, it always was just like, this is just friends that are doing something they like. And next thing you know, we're in the room with Shane McAnally and Hillary Lindsay and Lori McKenna and all these people. And it was just because we were like, we did what we wanted to do. We didn't try to be like, how do we get to them? We thought, how do we make something that makes them want to come to us?
Yeah. And those hit writers that you just mentioned, how kind and normal are they?
They're the most normal people in the world. Exactly. Lori McKenna, she wrote Humble and Kind. I've never met someone that has lived up to a song title that they've written more than that woman. She is humble and she is kind. And I look at what she's done, obviously huge songs, great songwriter, but she's a hell of a woman.
Yeah, dude.
And she is a great mother and she is a great wife. And she...
Doesn't she live not in Nashville?
Yeah, she lives in Stoughton, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Boston. I think there's something to that too, where it's like, she's not in the belly of the beast. Is she here all the time? Yes. Does she Zoom? Yes. But there's something about, and I have this thought at the time, even driving out here. Do you live out here? Like in Springfield, like coming out here, I felt like a peace, because it's just like away from the hubbub and the
totally
all that. Like, and I find it. I live close to downtown in Germantown in Nashville, and I'm like trying to slowly like get out, because I'm like, I just need to like.
We lived in the Gulch for 2 years when we moved here, and then we ended up getting a house on 7 acres in Greenbrier, and you hear cows.
It's the best, isn't it?
It is, man. It's so refreshing leaving downtown and getting out into a place where there's a windy road with trees.
Well, we don't create enough space in our lives to actually hear what we're thinking. We are just...
Yeah, dude, that's deep. So on a philosophical level in which you were studying in school.
Oh gosh, don't test me on that.
Philosophy, dude. No, this is interesting because I think a lot, and I think that you probably think a lot too. I just get that vibe. There's a lot going on in here.
Oh yeah.
And it's hard to silence that, one of the things. But another thing is just making the time to sit and do nothing in silence.
It's important and it's scary.
Yeah. Do you find time to do that?
You know, I'm not about to say that I don't work a lot. I work a lot, but as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at just turning off. Like, and sometimes that's just watching a movie, just like or reading, or just sitting and praying and thinking about what you're thinking about. Like, I feel like, you know, I said earlier, like I had an analog childhood, digital adulthood, which I'm grateful for because I appreciate things that aren't just always stimulation. I have so many friends that are younger that are like, they just have to have something always. I'm like, that's not good, because you're just putting in more and you're not allowing yourselves to weed through what's going in there. You have to get the Brita filter out and purify, and you need to take trips. You need to pray. You need to meditate. Go on a walk. I always tell people, like, if you're supposed to write about life, why aren't you living your life? Like, if you want to find inspiration, if you're hitting a writer's block, I'm like, go on a trip. Go read a book. Go watch a movie. There are plenty of things to write about. You are just tired.
Yeah.
You've just exhausted your brain. I don't know who told me this, but I've heard it from a few people that they've done tests on the brain, and I don't have the scientific data, but I believe it, that writing a song based off of how hard your brain is working and your CPU of your brain is the equivalent of taking the ACT a couple times when you write a song.
I believe that.
And if you think about, now going back to high school, you taking the ACT, remember how dead you felt after that, and how you just like, I just need to like drink a Sprite and sit here and just, and we don't take the time to just have the come down. It's like, oh, I need to write another song. I need to go do song starts. I'm like, no, man, like, go hang out with a friend. Go on a walk, like, go work out, do something.
That's how it's sustainable, right?
It is. It's sustainable by having other things. Like, I have friends that do not work in music, and I love hanging out with them because this is a narcissistic trap. It is such a trap to just think that the world is just revolving around you. And the fastest way to figure out if you're in that zone is get a friend who's a painter, and you'll figure out how much, oh my gosh, I talk about myself so much and what I'm doing. Like, we're not brain surgeons here. We're not saving lives. Are we hoping? Yes. But like, let's check ourselves at the door a little bit.
Yeah. And this all stems from, obviously, if you're listening, someone that has been extremely successful. And I kind of want to go into that a little bit and talk about some of those songs that have been really big for you. Mm-hmm. And what that was like for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was your first, because I know you've had a lot of success overseas as well. Mm-hmm. And you've had at least a Grammy nomination.
Mm-hmm. I've had some.
What was that? What are those for?
Those are, I did some writing and production on a Little Big Town album called Nightfall, and that got nominated for Country Grammy Album of the Year. And
was that Wine, Beer, Whiskey?
Yeah, it was on that. And then
which you wrote.
Which I wrote.
Which was double platinum.
Yeah, wild. And then I produced 2 songs. I wrote and produced one song called Problem Child on that album, and I produced a great song called Sugarcoat, and those were on there. And so I'm nominated through that, being a part of that. And then Sugarcoat, that same year, Sugarcoat was nominated for Country Performance of the Year, Duo Country Performance of the Year, as well as Lady A song Ocean, which I wrote. So those were up against each other. One I produced and then one I wrote, which it's a loose thing. It's not like Grammy nominations, like you're affiliated with Grammy, but like I don't know if I would get the statuette, but it's still kind of considered it, if that makes sense. Regardless, it's getting acknowledged for something I was a part of, and it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And then there was one last year with Lauren Daigle. I wrote and produced a song on her album, and it got nominated for Christian Album of the Year. So probably the first song, though, that really like changed a lot for me was a song called Night Shift by Jon Pardi.
Which I love.
Thank you.
And John grew up in Dixon.
Close to you.
Not far from where I...
Yeah, California boys.
So like Haley and I, my wife, we went and saw him at the Dixon County County Fair, playing with his band in front of like a couple hundred people, maybe 150 people.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that song, I wrote that probably... So I've been at Concord. I was at a company called Razor and Tie, and then they got bought by Concord. So I've been a Concord writer now for, I think, 12 or 13 years, maybe 11. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
So I've been...
That's a long time.
Same company.
At one spot.
Yeah. So I wrote that song, I think, in my third year of my publishing deal. That was after me writing probably 300 or 400 songs prior to that in that 3-year span, and just being like, you got to throw a lot of darts before you even get on the board. Like, I'm not saying you hit a bullseye every time, but like even just to get a little 17 in the corner, like it's hard. When you think about how there are hundreds of songs written a day and how we're all shooting to be on a 15-song album, like very, very hard. And I remember that was a really good lesson, because when we wrote that with Philip LaRue and Billy Montana. And I remember when I was working on the demo, I was like, there's something special to this, but I'm also really like kind of stupidly optimistic, where I'm like, this could be a hit. I don't know. Like, cause I still just really enjoy what I do. And
Which is great. And I think you need to have that belief.
You do. I mean, it's like, there's a good balance of being realistic about it, but also I wrote a song recently. I'm like, oh my God, this could be something that really changes things. Like having that, because I've seen it. I've had that happen. So I know that, one, it can happen, and also it could happen again. Like you're always one song away from changing your life, really. And when I wrote that, I remember working on the demo, and we actually hired Randy Montana, Billy's son, to sing it, who's a big writer. I mean, massive Luke Combs hits, a great writer in his own right. And he was an artist back in the day, and none of us felt like we could sing it. So I hired him to sing it. And he sang the demo, and I remember it did the thing. It got pitched around, and they're like, well, it could be for Luke Bryan, or it could be Tim McGraw. And John had made his first record, and it did relatively well. I think he had maybe one top 10 or 20 hit, and they were going to do another record. And I remember them saying, there's this guy named Jon Pardi that wants to cut it. And I remember all of us having a moment, because we have the right to be like, no, we want to hold out, because this is our intellectual property. And I remember being like, well, we could wait for one of the bigs, like one of the, the McGraws or the Keith and all that. And I just remember my publisher being like, you don't know, like, you have something now. Don't sacrifice that for the what if, because you just don't know. And so we were like, yeah, let him cut it. Well, he cut it, and his first single went number 1 off that album. And they're like, it's going to be the second single.
Was that Dirt on My Boots?
Head Over Boot.
Or Head Over
Boots. He had two number ones back-to-back
Okay.
Boot song. Head Over Boots, which he did with Luke Laird. Amazing song. And then they're like, we think Night Shift's going to be second single. And then it was Dirt on My Boots. I'm like, he's doing 2 Boot songs? And I'm not listening to anyone. They're like, oh, he just had a song about beer. We can't do that again. And then that went number 1. And then the third single, I forget what it was, that went number 1. I think it was Heartache on the Dance Floor or something maybe. And I'm just like, this is not going to be a single. And then the fourth one went. And at this point, I'm like, we're done. Because no one goes 5 singles deep unless you're Luke Bryan or Luke Combs, Morgan Wallen maybe. And the fourth single got to like top 20, and it just kind of didn't go any further. And I was like, well, they're going to move to the next record. And I remember getting a call from my publisher like, man, Night Shift has just performed so well on streaming and downloading, they're going for it. And I was like, what? And that went from me thinking, should we give it to him, to like, it's become a flagship song for his career. It's like, it's an evergreen now. Like, he will play that song every night for the rest of his life if he has a normal size set.
Yeah.
And
how rewarding is it to be at a show and hear a song you wrote being performed in front of thousands of people?
It's amazing. It's the best. It is like a kid at Christmas because it feels like you got the present that you wanted. It's like I've been investing all these years, and it's like, oh wow, I did get the Sega Genesis. I wanted that, and it's like I wanted to make music so that people would listen to it and sing along. Obviously, it changed a lot. I thought I would be the one up front, but quite frankly, the performing side of it always gave me anxiety. That was always my lead.
I get anxiety from performing.
I've done it my whole life, but I would like get like black out, deliriously so afraid as a child performing piano recitals. I would throw up. I would get like physically ill. And
did you get really bad anticipatory anxiety?
Oh my goodness, man.
That's the worst for me.
I'm not even trying to be gross. I would get diarrhea because my body would be like, you don't want to do this.
Yeah.
It's like rejecting the idea of it.
Physiological, man.
And just that anxiety. And honestly, when I allowed myself to release that, I was like, oh man, I can just make music and have fun in my studio, play instruments and write songs with my friends.
Yeah, because there's a whole nother pressure that we don't see in the artist world of the grind and the every night and the being away from your family and friends and all that stuff that I've talked to so many artists about, and then I'm sure you know.
Yeah, and that hit a point with me where when the girl I was dating, I was in the duo, obviously when we were doing it together, it felt like, oh, well, we'll be out together. And then when I had that option and when we stopped doing that, it like kind of made my brain a little bit go back to like, well, I can be a solo artist again. Like, I'll just do that. But once I really started seeing these artists that I've worked with, I'm like, the sacrifice that you have to make and the willingness to miss all the firsts of your family, your kids. And that's a true calling. Like, and I've always been like, I want to be close to my family. I have a 2.5-year-old nephew, and I think about if I was touring all the time, I mean, I miss the heck out of him when I don't see him for 2 or 3 days. If I don't see him in a week, it's a bad week. And I'm like, I can't imagine if that was my own child and I didn't have the luxury of a bus and I had to get on a van and I didn't get to bring him. I'm like, that takes you have to be really called to that.
Yeah. I went to Morgan Wallen night one at Nissan Stadium, just because Matt, his photographer, was going to be on the podcast. I wanted to watch him do his thing.
Yeah.
And Bailey Zimmerman was opening. And this is where I'm going with this. Like he was singing so hard night one to the point where like his voice is like cracking up, like not like laughing, but like
from pushing it so hard.
Like he's pushing with everything he has. I'm like, homie, you got 2 more nights ahead of you.
And then you have to do it again next weekend.
Yeah. Like you need to pull back because you're going to get nodules. And John Mayer, who I don't think is someone that's like a vocal powerhouse, he's like smooth, but he got nodules.
Oh, yeah.
And like, I think about these artists that are young that go out and just go balls to the wall and don't know how to pace, like a marathon, and the danger of that just vocally on an artist.
Vocally and, I mean, mentally.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you see like Wyatt Flores, I don't know if you know who he is. He's like one of these young, of the like singer-songwriter, Zach Bryan, a la Appalachian guy in an acoustic. Okay. And he's killing it right now, but he's like, I don't know, 23 or 4 maybe. And he had to cancel a bunch of stuff because he pushed himself. I'm like, there's only so much you can do. Like, yes, people idolize artists like superheroes, but you're still just a person that when you don't feel good, you want to be in bed or have your mom make you soup. Like, and you need to understand your humanity in this because you can only do and exert so much. Like, you have to pace yourself. And I preach that to myself too. Like, I mean, I was at my studio from basically 11 or 12 hours yesterday. And I'm just like, whoa. I need to eat another.
Sitting in front of a computer?
And in front of a computer working on tracks and producing. And I love it. But I'm like, I just hit a point where I'm like, okay, I have to stop. I have to eat. I have to like, you got to take care. And that's the same like those road people. Like, you have to I just don't know how sustainable a lot of these careers are. And I get frustrated when I see these labels or managers just pushing these artists. I'm like, man, you hope that they'll be able to do this for over 10 years. But if you keep them at this pace, they're going to be lucky if they get to 3 before they have a nervous breakdown. And then they won't even want to do it. And at that point, you'll say, you made a lot of money, but was it worth it? You ruined someone's life?
So that's interesting because the gatekeepers, man, the gatekeepers are this, it's like the industry. I think of the person at the top of the, down on Music Row at the very top of the label, the corner office person who's, calling shots and driving home in a nice car to their dope home in Green Hills or wherever. Franklin or I don't know, Brentwood, Belmead, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I always think of those people. They're the ones that are getting rich off of artists. And I think of these gatekeepers and I often think that they're so detached from the realities of artistry and the realities of even what you do as a songwriter. And I wonder what the next generation of gatekeepers is going to look like, if it's going to be different from now on the changing of the guard, so to speak. I mean, you at almost 40, as you go up, you could someday be a gatekeeper in the music business. And when you think about that, do you think that things will change as we see them now in the music business with Gen Z coming in and people's hunger for authenticity more so? Do you see a shift?
It's always going to shift. It's always going to evolve and change. I think, unfortunately, people are always going to want to make money. And that is always going to be kind of a blessing and a curse because you gotta buy bread. You got to buy milk. You got to buy eggs and survive. And how do you do that? You make money. But I do think that there is a shift as far as mental health has been obviously a huge thing. Pandemic on, 2020 made us look in a lot and look in the mirror too for the first time maybe in your life or in a few years. And I think we realize our humanity more than ever during that time. And I think that by default of that, it spread across business. Like you see so many more businesses that are like, oh, if you need to take a day, like there's a little bit more understanding that are like, oh wait, we aren't robots. We're not in the Matrix. We're not like, you gotta rest. And will the music industry shift? It'll only shift if people want it to. And if there's enough people that are on the front lines fighting for those things, I think it will. But if people just go back into that, well, I'm making a lot of money, it won't.
Yeah. And it is the music business. It's business.
Yeah, it's a business. It's not.
At the end of the day, it's revenue.
It's revenue. And don't be confused when people are like, they really believe in me. I'm like, they might be a fan and like it, but they want to make money off of you.
When did you really realize that the music business was about money?
When I worked for that producer and just I started seeing the label people and just it was weird because I think I romanticized it in a way where I was like, oh, it's just fans that have jobs and they got a suit and they got a corner office and there are those true A&R people I think that are fans, but business people just want to make money. Like they're not, as much as they want to say like, we really love what you do, they really love it when you make them money. like that, there's no way around it. I wish that it could just be all fun and games, but I'm also a business person too. It's like I need to be able to make a living for myself and future family and be able to do things.
Yeah. How have you learned business most?
That's a good question. I think it's just doing it. It's just I've now been at the same company for years, and I've renegotiated deals. My attorney, we talk a lot. Like, I've learned how this goes, and now I have this hat, Chromatic Music. I have my own JV publishing company. I have a writer signed to me through Concord named Lauren Hungate, who's the greatest songwriter I think I've ever met in my life, genuinely. And it's weird. I'm like, it's been really fun and really heartbreaking because I'm watching her now. She's in her third year, and I'm experiencing those first heartbreaks that I felt. Like, this is happening. Next day, it's not happening anymore. And just that derailing you. And it's funny. It's like, I always tell people, like, we end up growing up and wanting to be what we didn't have. And
so true.
And, you know, I worked for that producer for a couple of years, but he wasn't like guiding me through the business and really like that. It was more so I was kind of a slave in the studio, and he did produce some stuff of mine, but it was different. It wasn't really like a mentor. And I really love being that for the next generation, for Lauren and just for other writers. And I had a friend call me yesterday. He's like, man, I know you've experienced this, but I was getting this big cut and it was happening. They asked for the lyrics happening and then they just didn't do it. Like, what do you do? And I talked to him. I was like, man, let it hurt. Don't suppress it, because if you suppress it, you're planting a seed of bitterness, and that will come back and it'll grow, and all it'll take is another experience, and then you become what you water. And I think that Tom Douglas is a big songwriter, The House That Built Me, and has been a friend for years. And advice he gave me early, he's like, feel it when you need to feel it, because we are in the feel business, what we're doing. And I always tell people, I'm like, if you need to be mad about it. Don't, I mean, obviously you can spiritualize and be like, well, God has better. And that's true. I do think that, like, what's meant for you will be for you. But you know what? If you wanted something and you didn't get it, it's okay to be disappointed. Like, we do this because we would love results. Like, it's not like we're just doing it to just write songs to collect songs. And we're not in it for the money, because if we were, we would have a different job.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I don't know. It's
over the years, and you don't have to answer this, but have you renegotiated contracts based off of ownership percentage versus draw and the fluctuation of that?
Yeah.
So it's like taking less of a draw for more ownership.
I mean, it varies. It just kind of depends on where I am in recoupment, or like what's in the pipeline, all that, those variables. But I mean, even Lauren, the writer signed to me, we just talked about, because, you know, when her deal comes up, I'm like, I know I represent you on the business side, but I want you to get more ownership, because that's everything. And I'm, as much as I could be a partner in your publishing with Concord and be like, well, we want to take, I'm like, no, like, I want to set you up to build for your family. And I want to be fair to you. Like, if I have a say in it, I will fight for you to get more.
That's great.
Even though that means less for me, but I'm like, I'm not in it for that. Like, I'm like, I really want to help. I've seen a lot of writers just keep doing bad deals. And I'm like, you're not building something. You're just like, you might as well just be a barista and own your publishing at that point for some of these crappy deals that people sign up for.
Yeah, man. I often think about the idea of having the freedom to see someone that you really believe in. You're like, man, this person is so talented, but no one will give them the time of day or invest in them. And so you're doing that now, which is really cool. And so how did that come to be? Was that birthed out of that feeling of seeing the potential that maybe someone saw in you at a point, and wanting to be able to, in your own way, be able to make decisions?
I think if you ask my publishers and people I've worked with, I've always been pretty business minded. Like, I'm not just the guy in the corner that's like, just let me play guitar and write a song. I've always, and I think that this business is so corrupt, like any business, and so greedy. And I'm like, you know what? I can ask 1,000,000 times for things to change, or I can do something and be it. And I think that me starting this, you know, it's funny how it came about. It was during the pandemic. I was thinking about, because I've always been, from day one, I love developing talent, young artists, young writer. Like, I just think it's important, and I've always looked up to the writers that have maintained success in their career, and by success I mean doing well on radio, getting songs. I look at people like Hillary Lindsey, who's just always doing well, and she's always been open to the next generation. She's never been like, well, I know how to do it, I'm fine. Like, she knows that, hey, there's a new cool kid in town that might be saying it or singing it a little differently, and having that openness to being like, I'm still learning here too. And I feel that. I do not know how this works, why it works, will it keep working? All I know is I'm still figuring it out, and I'm enjoying figuring it out. And on the business side, so during the pandemic, you know, I said earlier, that was like a time where we were all like, what is life? What is the point of this? What am I doing? And we're stuck in our houses. Everyone's making sourdough bread. And I remember I had this moment, like this God moment, if you want to call it that, which it was, where it was like, I started thinking about how this town takes so much pride in writers' rounds and community and you know, you go to listening room and you meet a writer, you set up a write as an independent writer, and that's how you build it. And I was like, that really sucks for the people coming to Nashville in 2020, moving, uprooting, and not being able to get in there. And so I had a moment at the end of the year where I was like, what can I do? Like, how can I just be someone to listen to someone? So I didn't tell my publisher. I told maybe one or two friends. I posted on Instagram this thing called Make Music with Topher. It sounds I hate even saying my name that way. It sounds so gross. But I had that hashtag, and I just said, hey, if you are in Nashville, or you're not even in Nashville and you want to make music, but you feel like this year's been really hard to get heard or seen, I'd love to just listen to what you're doing and tell me why we should work together. And I was like, you know what? It's easy to talk about doing these things. I was like, but I want to do it, and I don't want anyone to tell me no. Because if it gets too businessy and it gets too involved in my publishers, I'm like, I know that this is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm not going to let anyone tell me that. So I'm not going to tell anyone. So I created an email address. I put it up thinking I might get a couple people. Next thing you know, within weeks, I have over 500 songs. And hundreds of people, and they're all over the world. And I'm like, man, this has not changed since when I was a kid. People just want to be heard. They just want a minute. They want a second of your time. And there's talent out there. Like, you don't get to a point where you're like, well, I'm in this upper echelon. I'm like, there are kids, I'm convinced, in Nebraska that are way better at Logic or Pro Tools than me or you or anyone. And they just haven't had someone to say, hey, I'm here if you want to talk about this. So I did that, and I was overwhelmed. It got to Apple Radio. My friend Kelly Band there brought me on the show to talk about it. And I'm like, what is actually happening right now? Like, I just wanted to be, it wasn't even a competition. I was like, I just want to give advice, and I'll pick maybe a few people to write songs with and just be that person that Nally was to me back in the day. And I picked 5 people, and I worked and met with all of them. And Lauren was the one that out of that 5 that as soon as I heard her songs, I was like, this is special. And there's not a lot of times in life when things are special. There's a lot of good, great, but special is different. And I felt it. I felt it in her singing and her lyrics and the way she would move words. I'm like, it is like a Lori McKenna or a Hillary Lindsey or these people that you're just like, where it's like a sixth sense or just something supernatural. And I had posted it, and my publisher, the head of Concord, came and he's like, hey, bud, I think you probably a little bit you could get a lawsuit. If I heard something and someone could be like, you copied that song. But I was like, I know my heart is pure in this. I know I'm not I've never been I'm here to rip someone off. I really just want to be that. And so he sat me down at the end of 2020, he's like, well, if you find anyone you're serious about, you've always talked about having a JV publishing company with us, joint venture. If people don't know what that means, where you partner together and you agree that we're going to work together on this person.
Yeah, and they help fund. And they get a piece,
and I get a piece by using my name to help get people in the rooms, or just.
It's a real win-win.
Yeah, it really, and I mean, a lot of writers have JVs, and I never wanted to do it like, to be like, well, look what I'm doing. I'm like, I really just want to find things I really love and people, and be that for them, what I've had with some people in my life. And he's like, if you find someone, I was like, well, it's funny you said that. I found this girl and there's something special here. And I sent him some songs. He's like, whoa. And within 8 to 10 months, she was signed. I mean, it took some time, and she was getting offers from Universal and all these other people. And I'm like, well, what does Tofer Brown have to offer? And all I looked to her was like, hey, I can't promise you anything. All I can promise is that I will be here for you, and I will help expedite the process. I will use my name of what I have to get you in rooms that may be hard to get in. And, with that energy matched with the brilliance of people like Courtney Allen, who's our shared publisher at Concord, who just fights for us day in, day out, we just mashed that together. And Lauren is like, I mean, she has Bailey Zimmerman, Carly Pearce. She's getting cuts with all these people.
Wow.
And it's just, it really, people overcomplicate it by trying to talk through the business and all that. I was like, I just really believed in her. And I
love that.
Dude. I was like, and that actually can be enough. Believing in someone can be enough. And will it happen overnight? Maybe. Will it happen 10 years later? Maybe. I don't know. But like, I think she would say like, me believing in her in Concord, like, gave her that gumption to be like, okay, I'm doing it. Cause she worked on the business side. She worked for a manager. She worked for a record label, and she took the leap of faith and was like, I'm going to just do this. And her husband has a job, and he was like, go for it, baby. Like, write songs. And I looked at her as an example. She just started writing with everyone, similar to me. Like, she was just like, I'm just going to do whatever I can. And I mean, she is, in the last 2 or 3 years, had probably 50 to 70 cuts.
No way.
They're just stacking up. And it's just, it really is, it is talent. It is God-given gift she has. It's special. But it's also just like, there's positive reinforcement. We're like, you're doing it. And yes, you're going to have failures. Yes, someone's going to say it's a single and it's not. But I'm here to just keep reminding you that this is what you were created to do. And if that's all I am in your life, then that's what is supposed to be in this relationship.
I hope that keeps happening.
Yeah.
I hope that you have the ability to do that with more artists.
Yeah, it would be.
I don't know if you have that hope, but just listening to it, I see you light up and get stoked about it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I God willing, and the creek don't rise. I hope I get to write songs and produce for as long as he wants me. I hope that I can just be a person that actually encourages and reminds people that you can do this if you want to do it. It's gonna suck. It's gonna break your heart. We're in the heartbreak business, but eventually someone will take care of that heart, and you'll see it grow, and dreams can come true. They still can.
Well, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Yeah, man. It was great meeting you, hearing from you. And there's a lot of similarities as you were talking about being an empath. I didn't even know what that was until the last couple of years. And then I learned I had to start putting up boundaries. I didn't know what those were either.
Oh, bro, I still am terrible with boundaries.
Yeah, dude, as an empath. So it's been really fun talking. And
yeah, it's been great.
Congratulations on all your success.
Thank you.
Success to come.
Thanks, man.
With Chromatic.
Yeah, thanks. And congrats to you and this amazing podcast.
Thanks, brother.
It's growing, baby.
Yeah, come on.
Let's go.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Stephan Hogan Podcast with me, Stephan Hogan. I hope you found our conversation with Topher as inspiring and insightful as I did. not only from his early days in Nashville to his success as a songwriter and producer. His story really is a testament of the power of resilience, creativity, and staying true to your passion. So thank you, Topher, for sharing your journey and wisdom. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. All of these podcast episodes are on YouTube, on video, and you can watch the video as well on Spotify. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you enriching conversations with fascinating guests. Join us next Monday as we dive into another inspiring story and uncover more insights into the creative process. Until then, keep creating, keep exploring, keep finding your own path to creativity and wellness. I'm Stephan Hogan, and this has been the Stephan Hogan Podcast. Thank you for listening. Peace.